back to playing cards, stock and finish. Got another deck review for you today. We are doing another deck that's never been reviewed before on the platform. It is the Rose deck from Hanson Chien Productions. This was a Kickstarter deck with funding completed on November 2nd, 2018, and I believe they got shipped out in late January of 2019. The deck was designed by Nicholas L. and Sean W., with Isabella Liu designing the jokers and assisting on the tuck. The description in the Kickstarter campaign says, "A seed of thought, a stem of ideas. The blossom of Rose playing cards, crisp and vibrant aesthetics for the cardist." So obviously this deck was made for cardistry, but since everything is pretty standard in the deck on the spot cards and courts, means it's perfectly acceptable for everyday use as well. There are no reveals or gaffs, so it's far more appropriate for deck collectors and cardistry than it is for Magic. Okay, let's get right into the tuck. To me, the tuck is actually a little reminiscent of the 1000 Cranes deck. It's the abstract and mosaic qualities that remind me of that deck. The tuck is a matte finish tuck. The overall design is minimalist, yet an art student may find it a bit schizophrenic in style because the background is obviously influenced by modernism with its divisionist and abstract qualities, but those are juxtaposed to the realism we see in the picture of the rose itself. I'd be willing to bet the designers of this deck were not art majors. The good news is that these schizophrenic and clashing qualities are present only on the tuck itself and not on the cards. The designers said that the deck was, quote, "inspired by the vibrant color of a rose and sharp, defined abstract shapes." The abstract shapes include both the clouds and the sky, the background, as well as the faint overlay of the gray, wonky, brick-like polygonal shapes. I really don't know how to describe the gray part. Sorry about that. The top, sides, and back are a continuation of both the abstract cloud and sky pattern as well as the faint polygonal brickwork, as are the inner tuck flaps. The bottom is as well, but we also have ad copy that reads, designed by Nicholas L. and Sean W., produced by Rose Intricates, printed in Taiwan by Hanson Chien Productions Company. And we have the Rose logo on the right. Lastly, there is a small version of the rose on the tuck flap, exactly where you'd place your thumb to open the tuck. That about does it for the tuck. Let's take a look at the cards. The back design of this deck is the highlight of the deck. It is internally self-consistent, unlike the schizophrenic nature of the tuck. It is just a wonderful abstract design with vibrant color. Absolutely beautiful. The spot cards are all completely standard. We all know what standard spots look like. The jokers, which were made by Isabella Liu, are custom, as is the power ace, the ace of spades. We have an enlarged pip with a distressed look to it with the word rose in the center. The courts are also standard, but they're modified standard. From the Kickstarter description, incorporating a tinge of light cyan and red, the courts evoke images of relaxation. So they've changed the color scheme of the courts, but other than that, they're standard courts also, just that cyan and red that they've switched out for the standard colors. And that's pretty much the cards. Now let's talk about what this channel specializes in and what makes this one of my top 5 favorite decks of all time, despite being a rather humble deck with a somewhat simplistic tuck. I almost decided to be reticent about this deck until after I had made my large video on card stocks and finishes in general that I mentioned in my first video, That's because there is a lot to be said about luxury stock. I'm going to have to include at least a little bit of that background here now for you to fully appreciate why this deck is so special. Okay, most cardstocks, with only a couple of exceptions, only vary in thickness by up to 0.005 millimeters per card. You can see how much variance there is in the right-hand column of this chart. There are a couple of cardstocks, however, that vary wildly. Unfortunately, luxury stock is one of those with this huge range of variance. Luxury stock by the Taiwan Playing Card Company is a double-edged sword. If it was consistent on the thin end of the spectrum, it would easily be the second best cardstock ever made, second only to Cartamundi's C9 on cambric black core, also known as Superlux. The problem with luxury stock is that only half the decks printed on it are of a thickness that feels better than almost any other stock. I'll have a separate video just on luxury stock so I can go over every deck and how the thickness is different on all of them. Of course, I've got those all measured down to the thousandth of a millimeter. There are 8 special decks, maybe 10 if you include honorable mentions, that are thin enough to hit this sweet spot, which makes it the most pleasurable cardstock to handle. And the Rose deck is at the very top of this list. It is the thinnest deck made on luxury stock and the softest deck ever made, period. There are 2 others that are very close, and we'll have videos on those also. But Rose is the very best luxury stock deck that has ever been made in terms of the feel of the deck. This deck is butter. If you've never handled a super soft cardstock, you don't know what you're missing. There's simply no other deck I'd rather handle when I want to pick up a deck that feels the best in my hands. It is the softest cardstock I've ever felt, and I've handled almost 1,000 decks. And I've experienced every cardstock and finish that's ever been produced, to my knowledge. For anyone who appreciates the feel of a deck, there is no deck I recommend above this one. Soft stocks aren't the best for cardistry, they're not snappy, but for pure enjoyment of the feel of a deck, nothing beats the Rose deck. Overall, Cartamundi's C9 on Superlux is the best cardstock ever made, but that's because it's perfect on many different attributes. But just going by the tactile feel alone, not even the C9 on Superlux decks are as pleasant to the touch as this Rose deck. It is the softest deck ever made. I know I've said that already, but I love this deck so much that I actually bought out the last of Hanson Chien's supply a couple months ago. I usually don't buy more than 2 copies of a deck unless it's one of my absolute favorite decks. Rose is the only deck I have 10 copies of. I even have more Rose decks than I have Raven Eclipse V3s, so that ought to tell you something. Okay, that's all I've got for you this week. Get out there and try to find one of these Rose decks after I've bought out the entire remaining stock on Hanson's site. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, abuse that like button, and leave a comment. This has been a deck review. We'll see you next time on Playing Cards, Stock and Finish.